Sector. Site establishment field.
Conflict 47 is a World War II themed tabletop wargame set in an alternative timeline where military technology has surged ahead after the deployment of atomic weapons tear open rifts that breach the barrier between realities. Mysterious messages issuing from the radioactive rifts are picked up by radio and then decoded to reveal hyper-advanced technologies the various belligerent nations quickly develop and adopt to gain an edge over their enemies and bring the war to an end. This is a tutorial series for the second edition of Conflict 47, which, although is a standalone game, shares the vast majority of its core rules with the third edition of the Bolt Action rule set. Therefore, if you are unfamiliar with both Conflict 47 and Bolt Action, you are invited to peruse the tutorial series that has been prepared to aid in learning the rules in detail. Tutorials for movement, shooting, pin markers, morale, assembling a force, and more are available in the Bolt Action tutorial playlist. Each tutorial focuses on one aspect of the rules and is further split into chapters for quick and easy referencing. Link in the description and end screen. If you are familiar with the Bolt Action core rules, this tutorial series will highlight and explain the additional elements that are unique to Conflict 47 and any major rule changes that differ from Bolt Action. Please note that the rules covered in this tutorial are for the edition as presented on release. In all probability, at some point after its initial publication, some rules changes will occur as the game develops and becomes more refined. With that said, let's get into the biggest change to the game since the first edition: Rift Dice. With the advent of Rift Tech, incredibly advanced technologies are now at the disposal of all major factions involved in the war. An important point to remember is that only models with the Rift Unit designation in their profile receive Rift Dice. This entry will also detail how many Rift Dice the unit receives, as some begin the game with more than one, and there are ways to increase this number in-game, which will be examined later in the series. Some units, such as the US Sherman M4A9T, have the option to swap out Rift weapons with more conventional weaponry. If this option is taken, then the unit does not count as a Rift unit and consequently does not receive Rift Dice. Like Order Dice, Rift Dice are color-coded to the owning player's army and should be the same size and shape as the Order Dice if not using the official Warlord Games Rift Dice or Order Dice. This is important because they eventually get put in the bag along with the Order Dice, and so should not be identified as such when rummaging around when drawing from the dice bag. The six-sided Rift die has three possible states that have different effects on a Rift unit: surging, active, and exhausted. Rift units may be positively or adversely affected by the Rift die placed with them when it is exhausted or surging, as noted in its profile. These are the Rift die's passive effects and are ongoing while the unit remains in that state. For example, if this squad of Totenkor has its Rift die set to surging, then it will receive a +1 modifier to wound during close quarters combat rolls, making it more likely to inflict casualties. As long as it is surging, the unit receives this bonus and so can potentially stay in this state for the entire game. More on changing Rift Dice states in a bit. While a unit's Rift Die is active, it functions normally with no further passive effects. If for whatever reason a Rift unit has no Rift Dice assigned to it, it will operate as if it has been issued an exhausted Rift Die. In certain situations, units are capable of having more than one Rift die assigned to them, most notably from the Rift Mastery ability certain heroes or officers possess. Passive abilities are always assessed on the most powerful Rift die the unit currently has in the following order: surging overrides active, and active overrides exhausted. For example, a Japanese Ghost Attack Specialist Infantry Squad has the Spirit Dance ability and is equipped with Shiboru rifles, so it begins the game with 2 Rift Dice. During the game, it exhausts 1 Rift Die to fire the Shiboru rifle using the Crush ability. The unit still has an active Rift Die, so it does not suffer an exhausted penalty. Additionally, an active ability can only be used once per unit order. This prevents stacking of such effects. So, the Ghost Attack unit has 2 Rift Dice, but it could not use the Shiboru Rifle's Crush ability twice when shooting, as the ability can only be triggered once per order. A Rift unit can use its active or surging Rift Die at any time to create a special effect, such as use a special ability specific to that unit. If the unit's Rift Die is surging, it then becomes active. If active, it becomes exhausted. If an active ability is used in this way as part of the unit's order, the Rift Die is changed after the order has been executed, unless stated otherwise. If the unit's Rift Die is exhausted, it cannot make use of active abilities. Such abilities are noted in the relevant unit's profile or on the Rift Weapons table on page 76. Whilst most active abilities are only inherently useful when a Rift unit is executing its order, such as when enhancing the shot of a Rift weapon, they can be used at any time at all, including another player's turn. Returning to the Totenkor, let's say they just won a close combat battle, but suffered casualties in the process. Now that combat is over, and no enemies are nearby, it would be an opportune time to make use of its active ability, the Dead Rise Again. This ability allows the unit to recover some, or possibly even all, of its losses. Because the unit's Rift Die is set to surging, it is now flipped to active. This means that the passive bonus is lost, but the unit is otherwise fully operational. If the ability was to be used again, this would change the Rift Die status from active to exhausted. Though their numbers are replenished, because the Rift Die is exhausted, they suffer the passive penalty mentioned in the unit's profile. In this case, it means they cannot be given a run order until the exhausted state is changed. This precludes them from initiating a charge, though a sneaky player can give the unit an ambush order to perform an ambush charge. More on that in the Close Quarters tutorial. Knowing when and where to use active abilities is important, and a wise player will be mindful of the impacts of a Rift unit's exhausted state. Certain Rift weapons can be overloaded to boost their power, but this will always include a backlash as a negative effect as well. In this case, the Rift Die must be surging, and once overloaded, it is then changed to the exhausted status once the effect has been resolved. The list of Rift weapon abilities and their overload effects can be found on page 196 of the rulebook. For example, the M4A9T Sherman medium tank features a turret-mounted M17 Tesla cannon, and if the unit has a surging Rift Die active, its controlling player has the option to overload it for a devastating attack. Normally, this weapon rolls 3d6 shots against a designated target, but an overloaded shot grants 6d6 shots. The downside is that the tank hits itself against the top armor with 1d6 minus 2 shots. A risky proposition, but one that extreme circumstances might call for.
Target destroyed!
So now you know what Rift Dice can do, but how and when do you actually play them? At the beginning of the game, Rift units normally deploy with their Rift Dice already set to active if the scenario allows units to start on the table. If the scenario does not have the units deploy at the start, such as during the first wave, or if the Rift units are in reserve, then put the Rift Dice to one side until the Rift units enter the battlefield. Once placed, a Rift Die normally stays with its unit. It will only be placed into the dice bag if it is exhausted by being used. So, in other words, follow the turn sequence as explained in Bolt Action Tutorial 9, only now there are also Rift Dice in the bag to consider. If the randomly drawn die is an order die, play it as normal, activating a unit of the associated die type. If it is a Rift Die, the owning player must roll it and then choose one of their Rift units that currently has no Rift Dice to assign it to, with the rolled face showing. That's right, the Rift Die is rolled rather than being placed as active as it is with deployment. Note that if the roll results in the Rift Die being in the exhausted state, then it goes back into the bag and another die is drawn. However, if all of the Rift units already have a Rift Die assigned to them, the player must choose one of their Rift units currently below its maximum number of Rift Dice to assign the rolled die to. Note that ordinarily there will be no Rift Dice in the dice bag in the first turn. Where there are exceptions, this will be explicitly stated in a unit's special rules or specific scenarios. While it might at first glance seem arbitrarily random to determine a Rift Die status once it's drawn from the bag, a player does have some control over this facet of the game. This brings us to another important feature of this edition of Conflict 47, heroes, who will be covered in the next tutorial.